Welcome back to the Ladakh Literature Festival 2020. Our session for today is The Ideal of Lightness, a conversation between Rehanna Munir, Jane Borges, Amrita Mahale, and Anukriti Upadhyay, which is going to be chaired by Supriya Nair. Supriya Nair is editor, 52, and co-founder of the media company All Things Small. She writes a books column for Mumbai Mirror and lives in Mumbai. Rehanna is an independent writer. She has a weekly humor column in HD Brunch and a cinema column in Arts Illustrated magazines. Her debut novel, Paper Moon, was published by HarperCollins India in November 2019. She is currently at work on her second novel. Jane Borges is a Mumbai-based journalist. She writes on books, heritage and urban planning for Sunday Midday, the weekend edition of Midday newspaper. Her debut novel, Bombay Balchao, was published in November 2018 by Westland Books. Amrita Mahale is the author of the novel Milk Teeth, which was shortlisted for the Crossword Book Award and longlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature and the Tata Lit Live First Book Award in 2019. Her writing has appeared in Hindustan Times, Indian Express, Scroll and Himal South Asian. Anukriti Upadhyay writes fiction and poetry in both English and Hindi, which have been printed by Rajpal and Sons and HarperCollins. A third novel in English, Kinsuki, is out from HarperCollins in July 2020. Currently, she is working with Wildlife Conservation Trust, a conservation think tank. Join our four women writers in conversation about literature's powers of reflection, memory, hurt, and healing.
First of all, everyone, how are you and in brief, how has this pandemic year affected you as a writer? Let's go alphabetically. So Amrita, if you can kick us off, please.
It's been a very interesting year. When the pandemic hit India, I was 4 to 5 months pregnant. I was working full-time and I was trying to write my second novel. Now I have a 4-month-old baby. I am on maternity leave, and the second novel is happening very, very slowly. So that's how life has changed from the beginning of the lockdown to now. And Teeth actually just turned 2 years old in November, and I'm still talking about it. So that's something.
That is a year of excitement. Anukriti, you have a new novel out this year. What's it been like writing or working on it through 2020?
So interestingly, the new novel which came out this year, Kinsuki, was written at least 4 years ago. It just got published now. My books which were written after, Dora and Mori, which were written after Kinsuki, just happened to get published before Kinsuki. So the only work I actually did on Kinsuki this year was the editing work, and editing is the most painful and most draining task, because you've moved out of the story, especially if a book that you've written so many years ago, you completely disconnected with it, and to go back and to edit and to see all the flaws, it takes a toll, especially during the pandemic, where everything else is also quite stressful. So I learned a lesson. I learned that in order to edit, I really should detach myself completely, not try to re-immerse myself in the book, just be distant. That's the way to lower the anxiety. And because of the 2-3 month editing process, I also learned myself to pace during the pandemic. I worked for a wildlife conservation think tank, and all the issues that nature is facing, the climate emergency that we are facing as a people, those suddenly nature started reviving itself. We just moved out. We had to stop encroaching on nature. So mixed bags, Supriya, I guess.
That really does feel like the best thing we can say about now. Jane, emergency essential services worker, journalist, and novelist. How has this year affected you as a writer?
Well, I've been writing a lot, but not for personal reasons, professionally. Um, Quite a strange year. The book was just about 3 months old when the lockdown happened. And for us as journalists, we had to completely redefine how we did our stories, the kind of stories we did, the issues and topics that we were focusing on. So a lot of things happened in the beginning of the first few months of the lockdown. Very unsettling, unnerving. We were not really used to working from home remotely and not having to step out and yet churn out stories day after day. Um, but now I think I'm settling in. I'm still not thinking too much about the book. But just 2 days ago, my book turned one, and one thing that I realized is that Bombay Balcha was kind of an anchor through this all. The feedback and the positivity I receive from readers, say on social media and even outside, it helped things feel a little more better than usual. So I think having a book release somewhere around this time did in a way help me um, mentally and emotionally as well. Professionally, it's been just very, very taxing and cumbersome, but we're getting used to it. There is no other way we can negotiate this pandemic.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me as a writer is that you can't get away. There's no excuse not to write in this pandemic unless you're sick yourself. But how? But I mean, that's one of the things that I hope we can address as we go on, which is what it means as a writer to cope with a dramatically changing world. But before we do that, Rehana, how has it been being the author of Paper Moon and a novelist and a writer and a thinker in 2020?
Uh, First of all, hi everyone, and I am just so excited to see all of you. I actually genuinely love the work of everyone on this panel. Supriya hasn't written a novel yet, which is a shame, but the rest of you have, and I, I, I think Jane, Amrita, and Anukriti all know how much I adore their work. So this is just beautiful. Uh, I think I echo some of Jane's thoughts because our books came out at the same time. They were also set in the same city. And Amrita, in fact, was hosting the session where my book was released last year at Lit Live. So, and Anukriti and I often discuss, this thing of a book coming out and what it's like and what it's like to publicize a book, which is most of the work, really, as we all know. Supriya, it's been awful as a fiction writer. I feel I had made headway with my new book until the pandemic struck, and then there was 6 months of absolute drought. I couldn't write a single word of fiction. Of course, I'm a professional writer, so I have my columns and I have copywriting and other sort of obligations. But fiction has been very hard to come by. Fortunately for me, there was some kind of travel that became possible. After which I returned home to Bombay, and the writing sort of, it returned in some way. I was, of course, questioning myself as writers do. Am I actually a writer? Am I actually a novelist? Was it just one book? And then I realized it's the time that we're all in. It's been a completely different experience from the first novel. And I suppose now there's time to make sense of it all. For the longest time, it's been just too confusing and overwhelming. Like Jane said, it's starting to clear a bit now.
Supriya, there's something I would like to add. Something that Rehana said reminded me of a story. So when I started writing Milk Teeth, Supriya was my neighbor. Or rather, when I was about 20,000 words into Milk Teeth and I decided to quit my job and write Milk Teeth full time, Supriya was my neighbor. And I remember for the first month I had a drought as well. I could barely write at all. And before that, I used to write only on weekends. And I remember thinking maybe I only have enough words in me to write on weekends. And I had a conversation with Supriya about this. And Supriya told me, oh, this is a muscle that you have to develop. You have to train yourself to sit down, set targets, and write in a disciplined manner, which is great advice. And I found myself turning to that advice time and again in the past 6 to 8 months. Unfortunately, it's had less success this time around because it's a very different world. And there's just so far that discipline can take you when the world around you seems to be collapsing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes you just have to learn to use the muscle in a different way, or if the body part suddenly it develops like a different use. So you just have to figure out how to navigate that. Um, so I was trying to think about, okay, one of the things you want to do as a moderator of a panel with four novelists is try and find points of commonality. And with some of your works, that's kind of easier and more obvious than the others. But I felt like among the things that you had in common beyond the superficial was that each of your novels made me think about memory and about uh, just about how we use it as writers. Because sometimes writing is about preserving memory, right? Shamsul Rahman Farooqi Saab, the Urdu novelist, wrote Kai Chand Ke Sare Asma, which is this like magnum opus, which was really just about it was like preserving a memory of old Delhi and its ways and customs and language. And he wrote it in Urdu and then he translated it into English. And it was literally, you could see what it was. It was a work that wanted to, it was like a museum for a world that no longer existed and that none of us had access to. Harish's mustache, which just won the JCB award, is like that about Kuttanad, which is an area of Kerala in some ways. But you can't also preserve something without transforming it, right? That's the lesson. That's what Balshao is. That's what Kintsugi is. And to me, that's kind of the art of all your novels, and it's also about like why I think you all ultimately chose to write in the novel form rather than whatever something else, memoir or journalism or something else. So I have questions for each of you that are kind of about change and transformation. I'd like to start with Anukriti since Kinsugi is the most recently published work of fiction for any of you. And so much of your work, Anukriti, is about crossing over. It's it's about kind of switching or the confluence of cultures, languages, states of being. First, could you introduce Kinsugi to readers who may not have had a chance to read it yet?
Sure. Kinsuki is about 6 characters and how the lives of each of them is impacted by the action of every other character. Even though the characters may not meet in the course of the story, yet their actions impact the other's life and face love, loss, healing, self-discovery, emancipation, empowerment as a woman, breaking traditions, sexual mores during the course of their lives. Also, Kintsugi is a kind of ode to the 2 places I love best, Jaipur, which is my hometown and where I grew up, and Japan, which is a country that endlessly fascinates me. So Kintsugi moves between Jaipur and Japan, and a small part of it happens in Borneo as well. Those 2 places with very old and very different cultures. So that's what I think Kintsugi is. But it's up to the readers to say what it actually is.
It is. It's a really loving depiction of the cultures of both Jaipur and of Tokyo and Kyoto. And I wanted to ask you about, kind of that crossover between Rajasthan and Japan. Did you find it freeing to navigate writing about a culture that, in which you didn't grow up? Or did you have stage fright when writing the Japan parts of the novel?
That's such an interesting and very thought-provoking question, Supriya. So, because Kitsuki was my first full-length work that I wrote, and I, in any case, write very intuitively, but I actually had no audience, no readers in mind. I actually never thought that somebody would like to publish what I write just for selfish pleasure. So no, I did not have stage fright. I was thrilled to be able to write about a place that has so deeply impacted me. And it was just, like you said, it was just very liberating to be able to write in a fiction form about these 2 very disparate places and how there are connections. There are connections, the jewelry art in Jaipur, the jewelry art and craft, and the Kintsugi art of Japan, both require similar kinds of patience and aesthetics. So there are connections, and yet there are so many divergences. And the first draft, at least, I can say, was a very euphoric experience. After that, the pain came.
I think everyone here smiled in sympathy when you said that. I want to ask Jane and Rihanna about, I mean, you have some similarities with Anukriti in that you're both writing partially or wholly about your hometown, about your home base. But I felt like both your books, like you had two layers of practice for writing these novels, right? One is you yourself lived some part of the life that you describe in these books. And the second is as journalists, as workers in the city, you had like this other layer of practice in storytelling about the city. So you had to break away from these habits, right? You had to break away from life and work to write these books. Am I right to say that?
So I was saying, in a way, yes, Supriya, and yet not. I think a lot of Bombay Pal Chow has also been pieced together because of my journalism. I remember one of the initial drafts, like Anukriti was saying, writing the first draft is usually very euphoric in experience because it's you just wanting to say whatever you want to do and not thinking too much about judgment or about what somebody else will have to say about your work, because it's just you expressing yourself. So that the first draft was really fairly simple and easy when it happened. What I did with that draft after that required some kind of rigor and research, because at the end of the day, I was writing about a very real place. And interestingly, even my stories about characters who live in a building and their lives and how their lives intertwine. And it's in a way, it's the timeline of the novel is really vast because we're talking about 70 years, and going back in time to a Bombay that I had never experienced or lived in was kind of challenging. So I had to be as authentic as possible to ensure that if I am going to be rekindling a memory for a reader, it has to be a memory that they can associate with and not something that I have imagined in my head. That was the challenge, and that's where a lot of my journalism came in. You know, you do your interviews, you do your research, you do your fact check, and it became easier. So in a way, it just helped having that foundation, and the process became less taxing. I remember Rihanna and I were speaking at a panel at Kala Ghoda earlier this year, and she asked me this question, and I don't think it was because I knew exactly what to look for when I was researching. So I didn't go out there and try to collate a lot of material. It was just enough for my story, and that made the process easier. And that helps when you are a journalist, because you're doing stories on a daily basis, and you know how much you need to find to make a complete or cohesive story. So well, yeah, that way.
So having this life experience and this storytelling experience was actually a help. Like both of them were kind of stepping stones to the novel rather than
Right.
blocks.
Yeah.
Okay. Rihanna, what has that been like for you? Like transforming all that, that life and storytelling experience into novel writing.
Yeah, I'm smiling because now I have the experience of the second one, or at least the one that I'm attempting to write now. So I can see how different it is. Paper Moon came from a place of, again, first draft is sheer joy, right? It's just azadi, it's freedom, it's beautiful. Um, the second draft is hard work, there's rigor, and the last draft for me, the final draft is panic, right? Because it's going into publishing. So that's been the thing. It's I wish I could just write first drafts and be done with it all. No, it was the book, and I'm glad to know you've read it, Supriya. Was of course it borrows so much from my life, from the lead character Fiza shares so much, and the beauty or the wickedness of it all was that I could really do what I wanted with it. The premise, of course, I did run a bookshop in Bombay many years ago, and that is the premise of the book. It's called Paper Moon. It takes its name from a fictional version of the bookshop that I once ran. The bookshop was in Santa Cruz. The one I actually ran was in Santa Cruz. The one that you see in the book is in Bandra. I was born in Bandra.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt you to say I passed Khoja Florist's yesterday and thought of the book very fondly.
Yeah. I know it. That building's gone. That bungalow is gone. You know, they've raised it and they're bringing up some monstrosity. I don't know what will come up, but it was. I think I'm being a little bit evasive because it was just sheer joy for me. The process of transformation. I think it applied to me. The book transformed me in some way. I was not being very literary minded about it at all. I've been a student of literature. I've engaged. I've been a writer. I've sold books. So I have, in some ways, had the experience of that world and people who populate that world, most of whom can be a little bit, if not intimidating, then certainly not very easy to be around. So I kind of I didn't let all of that affect me too much. I actually wrote a book that felt good to write, so that feel good was a part of the book unconsciously. It was only when I reached the end of it and I said, oh, okay, so then this is the kind of book it's turned out to be. I had no idea because I do tend to have a very different kind of so many things go on in one's head, and I'm glad and I was pleasantly surprised that what chose to emerge from my first novel was lightness. Was laughter, was books and music and memories and nostalgia and a lot of wish fulfillment. Supriya, I ran a bookshop which was very difficult to run that bookshop, and I had all kinds of problems to deal with, but I was very protective of Fiza. After a point, I said, you know what, so be it. This is that book. Too much of literature, I feel, even literature I enjoy, has to do with the sad beauty of the world. And, there has to be some space for something that, if it doesn't simplify the world, then certainly offers you some kind of relief and a space. And I'm glad my first book turned out to be like that. Very different from what I'm writing now.
Yeah, I don't think books simplify our world at all. So you're right about that. But I do think that they bring clarity to our world. And clarity is lightness is another word for clarity in some ways. Because all of you write sort of novels that are, all your readers consider them as novels of place. One of the questions that I want to ask you all is about belonging. And I think, Amrita, this is something that you have particularly had a chance to think about, both over the process of writing the book and over a couple of years of seeing reactions to it, right? Because your book, fans and critics now call it a quintessential Bombay novel. And yet, unlike Rihanna or Jane or myself, you're not writing about a place in which you grew up or in which you immersed yourself. And because you and I are friends, I know that you have kind of an ambivalent relationship with life in the city. What does that feel like? Like, is it a burden to carry this burden of place, of being inspired by Bombay or having to represent it?
So for those of you who don't know, I did not grow up in Bombay. I was born here. My entire extended family on both sides was in Bombay all along. But my own family, my parents, my brother and I, we were in Gujarat and we moved around every couple of years. So my summer vacations, my winter vacations were spent in Bombay with cousins, with uncles and aunts, grandparents. But Bombay was not home till I was 15 or so, when my family moved here as well. So my memories of Bombay are like suffused with childhood nostalgia, because I spent all my happiest times of the year, all my vacations in Bombay. And I think that shows in the novel to some extent. It's a very fond look at the city, because it's a hard city to live in, and it's a hard city to experience as an adult. So there is some separation between Amrita, who lives in Bombay now, lives in Mumbai now, and the one who wrote Milk Teeth. What was your question, Supriya? Yes, is that a burden? No, it's very amusing, because in my head this was not a Bombay novel. I think I was just being very faithful to the subject that I had chosen. So of course, the question of what cities mean to people was very much on my mind. I did want to write about a changing built environment and what it says about a city's culture, a city's politics, a city's identity. But in my head, it was always a city and not Bombay. And this was the city I knew best, so I decided to set the novel there. And I went about writing it very diligently. I mean, if I had happened to set it in, say, Delhi, I would have written about the city with some amount of fondness as well. So it's a bit of a coincidence that it ended up becoming a Bombay novel. But of course, the fact that it was set here then shaped the plot, shaped the characters very deeply. So this novel couldn't have been set somewhere else. It would have been a very different story. But I did not set out to write a quintessential Bombay novel at all. I think that's something that happened after the novel was done. After I sent it to Kartika, my publisher, she was the first person to point out. She said, "Oh, this is a Bombay novel," and I was immediately very nervous because in my head, Bombay novels are written by men, and they're almost always about crime and politics, and it's always like capital letters, like capital letters. This was very much
and Bargirls. How does it work for the rest of you, all of whom have written about places where you grew up? Do you feel like, Anukriti, do you feel like the Jaipur parts of Kinsuki are a tribute to where you grew up, or is it like about making peace with where you grew up? What was the alchemy at work there?
So the Jaipur part of Kinsuki was written actually after the Japan part. It's interesting that the book got sequenced differently, but I began writing Kinsuki in Hakone, where the first chapter of the book, which is now titled Meena, was set up. So we were in Hakone, and it was an experience unlike any other experience I had had till then. A mountain place, a hot water spring, and just the calming beauty of the Japanese landscape. I don't know where Yuri came from, that character with so much repressed grief and pain. But Meena, the rebellious nature of Meena and the confused nature of Meena was probably coming from some earlier self. The Jaipur part happened because the Japan part had a tendril going into Jaipur, and that's how the Jaipur part was written. So the Jaipur part was mainly my love for the work that the artisans in Jaipur do, the jewelry craft, the jewelry which is worn all over the world, but so little is known about the hard work that goes in, and the issues those artisans face, the kind of very close-knit community they have, extremely patriarchal, so much beauty, so much art, and so much oppression of women. So that was just my, if I may call it an ode, then it is an ode to the art of jewelry in Jaipur.
Yeah, again, Jane, your work seems, at first glance, I think to a lot of people, it might seem like just like a loving tribute. And I think a lot of people might read it and find it nostalgic, particularly because there's a historical element to it. But I sense that that's not all you were going for, right? Like it wasn't just about recalling bygone glory.
Like you said, like Amrita had mentioned, she grew up, she didn't really end up growing in Mumbai, neither did I. So I came to Mumbai when I was 16. I had spent a decent part of my childhood in the Gulf, in the Sultanate of Oman. And my happiest memories, incidentally, were in Mumbai, Bombay then. We used to come here for summer vacations, spend time. So I had I had this deep fondness for Bombay. And the moment I turned 16, I told my parents, I'm leaving Muscat and I'm coming to Bombay. So that was a decision that I took because I knew that I belonged somewhere else. And for me, that was Bombay. I think this book, in so many ways, was me trying to make sense of belonging to a city that wasn't really mine or wasn't something that I inherited. I'm talking about something like Cavell. I came to this little community when it was almost disappearing, and it is disappearing. We've had residents here whose families go back generations, and my family was an outsider of sorts when we bought this flat, we bought this home from a relative, but we were newcomers. So we were the ones who took some time to kind of get accepted. And it was difficult. If you've lived in a community where people have been here for an eternity and who think they know the place at the back of their hand, and then you come here and you claim your right over a certain place, it becomes very difficult. And for me, it was when I started writing this book, it was trying to make sense of this place, make and obviously the city as an extension. And I wasn't seeing it through a sense of nostalgia. I just wanted to learn to appreciate what I was part of and what was happening to it. So I think appreciation is would be a better word. I wanted to learn to appreciate the place I had come to call home. Bombay is a difficult city to live in, and I came from a very comfortable, sheltered life, and having to live in a city that is makes you independent, at the same time inconveniences you in many ways. There's some kind of joy in that, and this is a joy that I keep trying to recollect in my story. Something like a water pipe, the water connection story in my book. And it's a real story because when we moved into this building, we did not have a pipeline. So we did not have water for a good few months. And I remember us getting up in the morning, me, my brothers taking buckets and going to our neighbor and bringing the buckets up. So you can imagine, firstly, having to move into an old building and having come from a city where the showers were, you could use a shower as and when you liked, and now everything was rationed. It was strange, and I think I wanted to see the value in what I had come to acquire and make my own. So that was one of the
I,
reasons.
I live in an old building. I had to go up to my neighbors with a bucket just last month when the supply ran out. As you as you were speaking, I realized that of course you're right. Bombay Balchal is about making sense of a place to which you don't originally belong. It is an immigrant novel, right? Because the community is an immigrant community. It's a diaspora community. It's a Goan diaspora, and the move, so it's not exactly thousands of miles apart. Um, Rihanna, I have a question about that may be about technique. You talked about kind of the joy, and then the discipline and then the despair of working through your drafts. And in keeping with the ideal of lightness, I want you to tell us how you deal with self-doubt as a writer. Did I put you on the spot?
No, I'm thinking about it. Again, like somebody here said, was it Anukriti? That she's a very intuitive writer. I am too, not just writer. I am not, I have friends who suffer from being too meticulous. I'm not that person actually. And that somehow translates to my writing too. I'm sorry, I'm making a very bad case for myself as a writer. What I mean to say is I tend to go with what I feel is works or not. There is not too much scrutiny, at least at that first draft stage. I have learned now to share my work at an early stage with people. So self-doubt is. I was doing another session the other day, and I feel what I suffer from is that anxiety of influence. That is a problem for me, and that's where I find myself coming short very often because I'm comparing myself. It's a problem, and especially if you've studied English and you went to college and you study, I have T.S. Eliot still lodged somewhere in my head, and that is difficult to, I'm almost 40 now, and I'm still thinking about his impersonality theory, and I'm thinking about, literature is not a delving into a personality, it's an escape from personality, and I feel that's not how I feel, that's not how I am, that's not how I write. So the doubt largely comes from very early training, education, perhaps, and some kinds of, canonical works and figures who kind of colonize your brain for a very long time. And it's only with your own life experience where you learn to become more confident and front footed in other areas. And that seems to have helped me with my writing now. I am more self assured because I am writing something to first and foremost to please myself, really. And I use the word please because that's what I have done so far with the first novel and even the second one, for which I take inspiration from my grandmother's life. This, again, the self doubt comes from the inspiration part. Everybody, I'm so happy no one on this panel has done it so far. But the only questions I get are about, did this happen? Were you in love with this boy? Did he propose to you there? Did he that? And it's fine, and I've called for it. I mean, I've put myself out there very clearly. It's not like I've concealed identities very well. Having said that, there is a lot of draft, and I keep joking with the people, the real life sort of figures who the book might be or might not be about, and I joke with them all the time, saying, "I made you look so good, you know." It was not like this at all. You take some kind of inspiration, there's some memory, and then it's your own growing up, that kind of everything goes into this writing process. So self-doubt, largely, it's an ongoing process, and it's about kind of being in conversation with the voices in your head, which perhaps come back from very generations away.
Yeah. And all of you so clearly are readers as well as writers, which I know seems like a very basic thing to say. But I have read a lot, I write a weekly books column, so I do read a lot of books, or at least glance through a lot of books that are written by people who are not readers. So I feel this is worth mentioning. This actually leads me in nicely to a question that I have for all four of you, after which perhaps we can sort of cool off and prepare for audience questions later. You're all young women writers. Three of you are debutantes, or at least three of you have one published novel so far. Do you think critical reaction, just tell me honestly, like, do you think you've been taken lightly or too lightly? Do you think criticism of your work has kind of been hooked to the fact that you're a young woman? I'll go alphabetically again. So Amrita, I'm putting you back on the spot.
No, it's really interesting. The name of the panel, the lightness, the ideal of lightness. So when I think of light in the context of my novel, it's the fact that a lot of serious readers and some critics have called it a light novel, and a little bit condescendingly, of course. And I mean, I'm very lucky.
Yeah, that is a very condescending thing to say about your novel in particular, I think. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, and there are like two lines of like engagement with the novel. Like one of them is that it's a love story, and the second one is that it's a nostalgic look at the Bombay of the 90s. Both of which are true, but also very reductive. So yeah, I mean, I was smiling as you were asking the question as well. But I'm lucky that my book has received a lot of love from readers, and a lot of serious readers, and quite a few critics as well. But a lot of the coverage of the novel, at least initially, was centered on me. And I mean, I've been in a lot of articles talking about the rise of young women writers and debut women writers. So yeah, I mean, I'll take what I get. I'm glad that has got the book a wider audience. But I hope it doesn't turn away readers who are looking for deeper works. And I agree with Rehana, right? Like there is a space for lightness in literature. And I wrote the novel I wanted to write. I agree that, I mean, I did want to bring joy to readers, and I've always wondered, like, would I, and in the course of writing meditate as well as afterwards, what is more important to me as a writer, to write something that is admired, or to write something that's loved, or like, do I want to make the reader think, do I want to make the reader feel? And of course, these are not binary choices. But I would be very disappointed if I wrote something that wasn't loved or that didn't make people feel. So that aspect of how my work is received is very important to me.
Anukriti, do you think who you are, that is a younger woman writer, and the kind of work that you do has affected the kind of criticism that you get?
So the first, the two short novels which came out, Bhori and Dora, they were very Rajasthan centric. And when they came out, I realized that there is no original English writing on rural Rajasthan or on Rajasthan at all. So I think that just took away focus from who I am, and people focused on the short novels. And everybody who and I got very, very kind reviews. Everybody who wrote about them wrote about how they were rustic and how I used a lot of Rajasthani words, and how it was, they have a fable-like feel. So no, I did not feel with the first two novels that there was focus on me. I think the work was in focus and was very well received. With Kitsugi, because Kinsuki was a complete shift. It's an urban novel, whereas Dora and Pari were totally rural. Uh, the again, I mean, it's probably not politically correct to say, but I feel that my work appeals to women reviewers far more than it does to the people of the other party. So
That's not politically incorrect. You just like, if that's the truth, that's what it is.
yeah, oftentimes we have to weigh the truth in the balance of political correctness and incorrectness. But I'm so happy that we can say here, it's a safe place to say these things. So I think the novel has received really nice reviews, focusing on the work, not on who I am. Um, Except that some people thought that I should, after my first works, the novel should probably, or my work should go probably in different directions, um, and demanding almost that there should be social awareness, or there should be a deeper approach, which I found condescending. Just like Amrita was saying, because the question that the novel Kitsuki deals with, they are not light questions, Supriya. There is women's sexuality. There is women rebelling against patriarchy. I did not set out to write around these things. I did not. I confess. That's where the story went. But to say that the novel, just because people have read it quickly because maybe the story appealed to them or the story carried them through quickly, to say that the novel does not touch deep issues, um, that sort of that sort of hurt me, because not that I set out to write a deep novel or a path-breaking novel, just like Rihanna was saying. And Rihanna is absolutely wrong. She's such a fine poet. I've read some of her poetry. For her to say that she can't get out the English canonical learning that she did out of her head, that's not true. She writes beautiful poetry. Um, but yeah, to be bracketed as a woman writer is something that I don't want. As you know, I'm a bilingual writer. I write in Hindi as well, and it's the same case on that side of the language too. A woman writer writing on women's issues. No, I'm a writer writing on human issues, and that's how I want to be viewed.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of male critics or male readers realize how much they're missing out on, because women, of course, read across the aisle, but men, and I think there are studies that that prove this, but that men are far more reluctant to do that, to cross gender lines. Jane, how has who you are affected how your work has been received, according to you, if at all?
So strangely, Supriya, this is my debut. My first book was the one I co-authored with Hussain Zaidi, which was Mafia Queens of Mumbai, and it was non-fiction.
Sorry, yes, that's right. It was my
Yes.
mistake to
So
forget that.
no. So what happened when I wrote the novel is one of the most one of the questions that I kept getting in interviews is, after writing crime, why did you choose to write fiction? And at the back of my head, the only question that kept playing is the one that I wanted to say is, why can't I? And why does one have to get stereotyped as a writer in kind? Um, but I did go about explaining it, though it was never, though I really set out to be a writer I would have loved to be a novelist. Another kind of book came my way, and that's why I decided to work on Mafia Queens of Mumbai. But I think there is this tendency to look at writers as, people who can only work on a certain kind of book and not the other. I remember when I even tried to get Bombay Balchao, when we were approaching publishers, this was a question that kept popping up. Why can't you just write crime? It will sell more. And what would a book like, a book about a niche community in Bombay, would it really do well? I don't think it's great for her career as such, her writing career. But I took that, and that criticism, I'll tell you, comes from men, and a lot of men who I have worked with thought that I was taking a big risk when, moving and shifting genres and trying literary fiction. It was a risk that I was very happy to take. It was something that I did not want to fixate over as much. So yes, I think people should stop looking at writers as people who can only work in a certain realm and not the other. That was one thing. With regards to criticism, I see that the book was received in different ways by different people. Some called it a food novel. Some called it a novel about memory. Some called it so there were different ways of looking at. People looked at it from different lenses. I think everyone has had a takeaway from that, a different takeaway from the book. And I really don't have any complaints on that front. Though I really did not set to write a food novel. It was a book about a community and a celebration of community life. What I'm most happy about is representation. I think a lot of Goan and Mangalorean Catholics from Bombay have reached out to me saying there is finally a story about us in Bombay, because this is a community, and like most other communities that have migrated to cities like Mumbai, they've gone underrepresented. They don't know their own story. And it was a story that I really wanted to tell. And I'm glad that helped for the book. There has been some kind of representation through Bombay Balchao, irrespective of what critics have to say. Critics can sometimes be harsh. I remember one kind of criticism that I got where the writer wanted to compliment me and yet not. And he said something on the lines of, there is a tendency to be extremely generous towards a debut writer. I don't think that is true. Nobody's trying to be generous. And so he actually looked for ways to bring the book down. And I found that very amusing.
Yes.
In Kartika and I were actually breaking down every sentence that he said. It began with something nice and then ended up with some kind of criticism. It's good for a writer who's getting a lot of positive reviews to see it from another lens and have their book uh, analyzed so deeply by a critic who wants to criticize.
Yeah, in the dating scene, that's called negging. Rihanna, can I lob this question to you?
Yeah, if you could just, succinctly
Repeat the question. How has who you are, which is a younger woman writer, affected the kind of reactions that you get to the book?
Yes, I'm old enough to be flattered to be called young, so that's nice. And also,
It's fun while we have it.
Adukruti, thank you for those very kind words about my poetry. You really are very appreciative. That's really sweet. Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with everything everyone has just said. Again, with me, I really put myself out there in ways that perhaps some of you haven't. It was the premise and a lot of the plot points and etc. was so echoed so much of my own life that a lot of the not the criticism, some of the condescension or some of the dismissive attitude that I received was, oh, so there's this girl who's sitting down, at an Irani cafe and writing in her journal. That's the sense I got, that someone's thinking that you're writing a little memo, you're writing a little diary. Dear diary, this happened today. And it's really funny because I'm, again, each to their own opinion. But if the opinion comes from a very preconceived notion of what a debut novel should be, or what a Bombay book should be, or what a coming of age novel should be, perhaps someone close to me, or once close to me, said, "Oh, why did you write a young adult novel?" So I laughed at that. I said, "You mean because the protagonist was a young adult? I mean, are you talking about the reader, or are you talking about the central character?" really, the book gave me so much pleasure that really took precedence over everything else. I think I don't know if that's the right way. I don't know if that's the literary way, but it was something that really made me feel. It empowered me in some ways, and I think I'm taking that experience onto the work that I'm doing now, which is
Yeah.
a completely different kind of zone.
I think many of your readers will agree about the pleasure principle, and that goes for your work, Rihanna, as well as for all of your wonderful books.